Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Game Composure. I'm your host Angelo Valdivia and I'm super excited to bring you this new podcast series. This episode features Adelaide-based composer Christopher Larkin, who's known for composing music to films like Barbecue, which is currently on Netflix. Go and check it out after this episode. The ABC Kids show The Adventures of Figaro Pho, and of course the smash hit indie adventure game Hollow Knight. We talk about his history with games and music, some of his approach to writing music for different mediums, and some advice on how to get into professional composition. Game Composure is a podcast series featuring interviews with people working in and around games music. This includes people who write music for games, perform game music, provide commentary, or just strongly advocate for it like I do. The lovely theme music to this show is produced by Christopher Larkin, and I'm so grateful for it. Please do enjoy this first episode of Game Composure. Chris, thank you very much for joining me on your first and best episode of Game Composure. How are you going?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and this very hot weather that we're all dealing with at the moment. It's like 41 degrees or something like that, and you've got a cup of coffee, which I'm astounded by.
Yeah, it's getting pretty cool though. I tend to drink my coffee very slowly, so while I'm working, so it gets a bit disgusting room temperature by the time I'm about halfway down.
Nice. So let's start with the beginning with sort of who you are. So give us an intro about like who you are as a professional and maybe some of what your interests are.
Okay. I'm a composer. I'm also a sound designer. I've been working in games for a little while now, but I have also done a number of corporate videos, ads, films, and animation. My interests primarily are in doing things that are creative, but I ended up narrowing that down to making music and sound. And I guess I'm probably focusing 3/4 of my time on the music and then 1/4, or perhaps a bit more than that, on sound. But yeah, music's, I guess, I feel is my calling. So here I am, making music for games and what have you.
Excellent. So let's start right from the beginning then. So how did you get involved in music? Where did it all begin for you?
I grew up with pretty musical family. My mum was pretty involved with the music in the church, and my dad was a conductor, and he also taught me piano actually when I was in my teen years, and during that time he introduced the concept of improvisation to me, and sort of showed me how to like write a melody that you can come up with on a piece of paper, and he sort of helped me out at the start, and that sort of encouragement helped me sort of figure out that I can actually use the piano as like a tool rather than just as a thing to recite what other people have written. And I think because my brain works a lot better making stuff up, although I do enjoy other people's music, don't get me wrong, I do have this part of me that really wants to make stuff. And as soon as I figured out I could do that with the keyboard and then consequently other instruments and software, it sort of became a bit of a calling to make music. So, yeah.
Cool. So were you obviously like writing melodies and things like that when you were younger, but, did you start out thinking that you were going to do more composing when it came to music when you were still starting out?
Nope. Not when I was starting out, no. I didn't know what I was going to do, though. For a little while, I was also hoping I'd get into graphic design and drawing comics and stuff, but I was never as good at that as I was with music and stuff. So as soon as I sort of came to that realization, I decided to finish off high school in Brighton Secondary School, where they had a composition elective or course. It's basically it's a high school that has this very large music sector, and they taught composition and arranging there, and I had a couple of really great teachers who were really encouraging when I went there, and I decided to continue that into music school and university at the Older Conservatorium of Music in Adelaide, and and I guess somewhere around the high school let's do this more I decided to pursue it more seriously. So, but I didn't know. I think I always wanted to do games, but I didn't really know how and for whatever reason, I didn't like orchestral music either. Which is odd because I write predominantly orchestral music now, but I used to hate it. And it wasn't until like going to Brighton and going to music school that when I got exposed to Stravinsky and like Debussy and some other composers that I sort of discovered a love for it and wanted to pursue it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, Stravinsky's the same for me, and even Tchaikovsky. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I just love their big sort of brash, but also delicate and very intricate sounds and stuff. But we can get into that a little bit later, even. But yeah, still going on with sort of your formative years. So you dabbled in a little bit of some game development when you were younger as well, didn't you?
Yeah. My friend had introduced me to this piece of software called Game Maker, and I figured out how to make my own platformer, and amongst other things. And I called the platformer Little Blue Goopy. I have no idea why it's called that, but
It's a great
it's
name.
a little blue. I think it's because I was sort of taking off the Goomba character from Mario, and I called it
Yeah.
Goopy because it sort of sounded similar, but it looked pretty similar. But it was blue, and you jump around and squish things and pick up coins and have a lot of fun.
Cool. Did you write the music for that as well?
I think I did a couple bits and pieces tracks, and then I downloaded MIDI files from the internet and used those as well.
Yeah, fair enough. So getting into university then, your main instrument's piano, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, so getting into university then, how did you find sort of your experience studying composition? And, you know, did you also keep up like aspects of performance and things like that? Or did you really sort of focus more on writing music?
I was never really great with performing, and I think it's because of my sort of preference and my psyche and all that sort of stuff. I don't really get a big kick out of performing or work in front of an audience. And I guess I'm always really interested in the construction of a thing and perhaps the engineering behind it, not just from not just sound engineering, but also orchestration and all these sort of things. So I sort of left the music lessons, piano lessons and performing stuff, and favored the composition and the music technology. And I found some music technology stuff at the university when I was there too, which was really great.
Yeah.
So we learned basic things like recording a band and miking up. Actually, it's not basic; it's quite complicated. Miking up a drum kit and guitar amps and stuff, and also orchestral instruments too.
Yeah. Drum kits are the worst to mic up. My gosh, I did sound tech in year 12. You know, I also went to a special interest music school, and yeah, miking up a drum kit is the absolute worst thing. There are so many things you have to bloody do with those things, whereas just miking up an orchestral instrument is so much easier.
Drum kit's like an orchestra in itself. You've got the bass, you've got the toms, and they're almost like different sections of a big band just by itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you play any other instruments in that case?
Not really. I sort of fake it though. I kind of if I'm coming up with a track that has some guitar in it, I might just record one bar at a time, sort of find the notes, play some strums, stop, find the next chord, hit record again, and it's quite a long process. But my brother plays guitar, and he ends up playing on a lot of stuff that I do.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, he's great, great guitarist. I feel like he may have felt like he was getting a bit taken advantage of when we were both living at home, but he never said anything, so I think he kind of enjoyed it.
Oh, fair enough. So if you don't mind me asking then, so how does your family see your work then, seeing you sort of progress from where you started as a kid, being influenced by them with music and then taking it on and becoming a professional with it?
I think they're pretty happy. I'll have to ask them. I think my dad's pretty happy with how it turned out. Obviously after he gave those lessons early on and stuff. One thing I think maybe they don't like as much is that when I get really caught up with a lot of projects, and because it's a very creative intensive thing, I probably don't call as much as I should sometimes and all that sort of stuff. But on the whole, I think they're really happy with things. So yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Hey, you're staying off the drugs and the alcohol and all the other terrible things.
As much as I can.
Fair enough. All right, so let's get into some of your professional stuff then. So from university, where did you go? Where did you start?
So while I was at university, I was sort of just making compositions for the course and then making stuff on the side. But like for the course, it was more orchestral music compositions. But on the side, I was making like electronica and weird stuff on my computer. But my supervisor got a call from a different university that had a film school, and a producer was looking for a composer for their film. And I was lucky to get recommended for that, and then I ended up writing some music for their short film, and I ended up getting to know some other filmmakers there as well. So I had sort of I sort of got inundated with some short film projects, and through that I kind of learnt how to make film music, sort of getting to know the flow and structure of film, and also like how to get it away with using sample libraries and programming them to make them sound realistic, and that sort of gave me a good start for being able to produce semi-good quality tracks on my systems. So that's where that went. And I guess someone I went to high school with's husband owned a animation studio, and they made animations. They were starting to dabble in games, and they made some corporate videos and stuff. So I ended up doing some work for them, and then it sort of went from there. So
yeah, okay. So that film that you worked on there, was that Wastelander Panda?
no, that was Monkey Bar Mafia, I think. That's,
I was way off with that one.
It's a takeoff of Ocean's 11, except the characters are about 7 years old. So it's set in a primary school, and it's sort of a heist film, and the kids have to break into the principal's office to steal a football card that was confiscated, and the whole film is sort of like them planning the heist, and we did this sort of David Holmes inspired heist music for it. It was a bit of fun.
Fair enough. So that was the university project.
Yeah.
Okay, I beg your pardon. So when did Wastelander Panda come into it then?
That was like 2 or 3 years later, I think.
Okay.
So Wastelander Panda is a post-apocalyptic mini-series about a panda, but it's told seriously. It's sort of a bit of an left of center kind of, I guess you could call it a cult kind of following that happened, where this panda, you know what? I can't remember the exact details of the story, which is a bit
That's
embarrassing because I worked on it quite intensively. But it was a post-apocalyptic story, and it was about love and loss and retribution and all those sort of things. So I got to kind of explore that, and it was good fun.
Yeah, whenever I saw like little snippets of that, it always reminded me of something like Mad Max, just with a panda thrown in.
It was kind of
Max or something like that.
That was sort of the premise, actually.
Yeah,
to an extent.
Yeah, and that was with Kirsty Stark, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, Kirsty Stark was a producer, and Victoria Cox did the direction.
Yeah, and she's a pretty big shot film person in Adelaide and South Australia in general. So that's a really cool project to be attached to. So what else? What other sort of projects did you do along then? When did was there a government one or something that you did at some point?
There was a few government...
Or a council, Adelaide Council, something like that?
I did some music for a few different corporate videos, and some of them were government, and one of them, actually a TV ad that I did was for the University of Adelaide. So I did sort of this mnemonic theme tune for the Adelaide University, and that kind of stuck for a long time. I sort of discovered not that long into it that writing music for a corporate video is actually really hard because there's so much information that has to be put in, and I found that I was sort of just filling the space with music and sound, and I couldn't sort of just loop what I had written because it would start to get repetitive, and in order to maintain the, I want to say audience, but they're also like employees, attention in order to learn all this information, you really have to keep changing the music up. So yeah, that was a interesting process, and I kind of came to understand why library music is pretty important, because it's sort of impossible to a certain extent for all this sort of information giving videos for composers to like fill in the space, and there's not often much budget for it. So I think library music gets a bit of a bad reputation from other composers, but I sort of see the benefit of it sometimes. Anyway, I'm digressing a bit, but
no,
maybe that would be interesting.
Well, you mentioned library music, so for anyone who doesn't understand what library music is, like, what is that?
Library music is essentially music that's composed for a catalog or a library for others to purchase and use in their videos, and it's usually not an exclusive purchase, which means if you buy a track or a license to a track, someone else can end up using that track in something else. It's just a sort of a large repository of musical ideas for things that can be used in film, games, even corporate videos and advertisements. I've never written for a library before, but one day maybe I'll get into it, but not yet.
Fair enough. All right, so now going forward again, so what other projects did you work on? Were you working on games at this point, or were you still sort of doing government work or corporate or film?
I can't remember exactly when I sort of got back into games again, but a friend of mine mentioned a friend of his that was making a game, and he was looking for some music for it. His name was Matt Trobiani, who ironically I'm working with at the moment. But he kind of introduced me to the game scene in Adelaide, actually. I did some music for his game called Hatland Adventures. And from there, he just exhibited that game at the AVCon, the Adelaide Video Games and Anime Convention. I don't think I said that in the right order. But anyway.
The Anime Video Game Convention.
That's the one, yeah. So I went there, and I got to meet a whole bunch of people, including Chris Johnson, who I made the score for Expand with. Mm-hmm. His game Expand, our game Expand. Kind of went from there.
So you went and did you have anything to do with Hacknet, or was that completely separate?
I made one track for Hacknet. Sold really well all over the world, and it's known for its really good storyline and engaging story. And while I didn't do much of the music for that, they've got some really great music artists who worked on it. One guy, I can't remember if I'm pronouncing his name right, but Remy Delego or something. His tracks are fantastic. I need to learn how to pronounce his name properly because I want to credit him more. But anyway.
That's fine. I have to look further into him then. I don't know him.
No worries. Yeah, it was good.
Cool. Then, so you worked on Expand, as you mentioned. Expand, I remember seeing Expand at AVCon 2012 was when I saw you guys. I don't think you were working on the game at that point, but I remember seeing Chris Johnson debuting the game there, and thought the game looked really cool, looked really interesting. And then a couple of years later, I heard that you had collaborated with him on that, and then you got brought into the sort of design process of the game, weren't you? I'm
just trying to remember if the first time you saw it in 2012, if I was working on it or not yet. I
remember seeing Hatland Adventure, and you were there at that station.
Yeah, that was the year that I would have met Chris then.
Yep.
Yeah. I was brought on to do some music with Chris on that, and we worked together on creating the different levels. I would say that Chris takes all the credit for the level design, but I did write some music. Actually, I think I may have even written the majority of the music while he was designing the levels. So we sort of talked about concepts of shapes and movement. By the way, I should explain, Expand is it's sort of a circular labyrinth adventure game in the sense that you control this little pink square in this really circular black and white world, and you have to sort of make your way through the world as it shapes and collapses and expands around you. And there's certain puzzles involved with trying to avoid getting squished, touching red blocks, and various things like this. So, and the way that the shapes move is often tied to the beat of the music, and we did all sorts of like experimental things like that with exploring slightly abstract shapes and movement with kind of gestures in the music and stuff like this. So so we worked a lot on that, and that took us to Tokyo Game Show and PAX, and we released in, I think it was 2016 from memory, or 2015. My brain's not working at the moment, but it was around then. So if anyone's listening who hasn't heard of it or is interested in it, definitely check it out if you can.
Yeah, it came out on the PlayStation Store, I want to say in 2017, but it might have been 2018. I can't remember off the top of my head.
That would have been, I think it was late 2017.
Yeah. How did working on that game sort of change the way that you approached composing for games?
When I started off working on Expand, I really wanted to explore music that can adapt and change to the player's input or the progress through the level. And one thing that changed my approach to games is learning of a particular technique involved with changing the music as you progress. And I tried different things. There's one approach involves changing the structure of the piece to the progress of the level. So say you have a verse and a chorus, perhaps the game will stay on the verse until the player gets to a certain point in the level, then the music will switch to the chorus. I tried that, and for a game, in some games it might work very well, but for a game like Expand, it didn't work initially. I ended up using that a bit more on the last level, but there's this other technique I figured out, which I kind of already knew about because I played a lot of Banjo-Kazooie early on, and it's pretty straightforward. Basically, you have the same piece of music, but the arrangement or the mix of it changes depending on your location. So in Banjo-Kazooie and Mario 64 as well, you're running around above ground, you have this overworld theme, and then you jump into the water and go underwater. You have the underwater variation of that theme, but it's still playing in the same beat in the same bar as you were before you entered the water. So it's all in sync. And so with Expand, we've got one of the worlds in particular, which is called, I say world, one of the levels, which the name of which I can't remember.
That's all right.
Anyway, it's got about 20 different layers, and rather than just switching to the underworld variation, it sort of does a subtle shift with a subtle mix change between lots of different layers. So it kind of morphs and shapes depending on your progress through the level. So I kind of learnt a lot from that, and whenever I get the opportunity to do something like that, I try to, but I also learnt that establishing a system like that takes a lot of time in the composition approach, because you have to really think forward as you're writing something. So think ahead, because when you're writing music, it's often done in a linear way. So you start at the start and you work your way through the middle and then you finish at the end. That's how you sort of, well, actually not everyone composes like that, but I often find I'm sort of pulling everything together in order. And I'm starting to digress a bit, but this is probably going to be interesting for the podcast. From university education and through composing music, we learn how to be dynamic and think of structure of a linear piece of music. So it might start off quite soft and gradually build. You might have a fast section which builds to a climax at maybe 2/3 of the way through, and then it makes its way towards a finale and then a slow finish. The big challenge with games is that music oftentimes needs to loop So you have to keep in mind that if you have a piece of music that builds to a climax like that, and it loops 200 times while someone's trying to finish the level, they're going to hear that climax 200 times and they're going to get damn sick of it. And sometimes something like that isn't avoidable, but if you do think that this is going to loop, you can construct the piece in such a way that it maintains more of a steady dynamic throughout, but also has a lot of interest in it. So I'm trying to learn at the moment actually how to create and generate more rhythmic and orchestrational interest by adding things to the accompaniment, such as I'm going to start using technical words here, but like syncopated rhythms and little things in the background that that aren't overtly the main point of focus while you're playing the game, but they're just sort of little things that just sort of help energize the player's emotions while they're playing the game. Because if you do that big climax and if it's on like this one big theme and it's a really simple theme and then it ends at the top, and it's sort of like you're always drawing the player's attention towards that while they're trying to solve a puzzle. And I really get annoyed with games when that sort of thing happens. So I'm sort of looking into how to do that, and it's an ongoing process. It never stops.
Yeah, for sure. So in that case, at this point, looking backwards now, did you find that studying music at a very sort of traditional music school like the Elder Con, which I went to as well with you, which I found to be a very traditional classical program? I'm pretty sure it's changed a little bit now, but at the time, 10 years ago, did you find that learning sort of in that traditional sensibilities of musical composition, does that help you now in the work that you're doing, or do you find that you have the skills, the basic skills there, and you're trying to find new ways to sort of use those?
I think it was still definitely really useful and handy to have all that, and because it's still important to be aware of like all the different directions you can go. And even if I got a bit frustrated with how things had to be structured in the classical realm, there were other things that were taught that have been really useful, like even something like classical harmony. So learning how to move different voices around the keyboard, even though I don't stick to those rules very much, but having that awareness of what makes good harmonic voice leading has sort of helped with my orchestration and stuff like that. So I definitely value having that education. And I sort of talk about the studies at the university being very traditional and all that, but we also looked at music from other periods of composition and so like modernism and stuff and chance composition. I think it was John Cage who developed a system of dice rolling to compose his pieces of music and things like this, and things that definitely aren't formulaic. And there was this method of 12-tone composition, which is it's a form of composition that uses absolutely all the notes within an octave, or all the notes on the keyboard, just to keep it simple. And you have to stick to certain rules with how a melody or a line or a voice has to move around those different notes. And because you have to use absolutely everything eventually, it can make for quite clashy and harsh sounding music, or at least people will interpret it that way. But there are other ways which you can change the rules to suit certain other ways of composing with those 12 tones. Anyway, so we learned a lot of interesting things, and I try to apply what I can.
Yep. So do you find yourself floating around sort of a similar range of styles that you compose music with, or do you always try to change things up as much as you can depending on the projects? Would you say that you have a particular sound? If someone, if say 10, 20 years from now, you're this huge hotshot composer, you've got millions of dollars, you're the most popular person in the world, would you agree that if people who understood and liked your music would say that you had a particular sound or style?
Depends what music ended up earning the millions of dollars. But it seemed to be, people have said recently that my sound seems to be quite melancholic, and the soft piano and strings thing, which I guess I sort of figured out a way to do it that was pretty effective and was used in Hollow Knight and Expand and some other projects I worked on. But it's definitely not the only thing I can do, and I do try to change it up quite a bit. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answered your question. Would I agree with them if they said something like that? I'd probably say no, I can do other things, but it's probably the thing that I end up being the best at, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, it's working for you.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been fun.
So then after Expand, what came after that? There was a film or something, wasn't there?
After Expand, I worked on a documentary, a feature documentary about barbecue, which is now on Netflix. It's called Barbecue, and the filmmakers...
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you can check it out on Netflix.
Absolutely.
I think it's still on there. It should be on there. The filmmakers of Urtex Films, Matt and Rosie, went around the world to, I think it was about 13 different countries, and found people to interview regarding their process of making barbecue. But it was primarily not so much about the cooking process, but also probably more so about the ritual or the bringing together of family and celebrating their identity and all these sort of things. So
the cultural aspect of barbecues and how it's communal.
Yeah, definitely. So we tried to focus on that, and with that, we went with a music score that tried to underpin the seriousness of that. So not treating it like a trivial cooking show, but actually giving it a big serious orchestral score underneath it to hopefully give it a bit more gravity and seriousness. So, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. And then after that was the big one, wasn't it? That's when Hollow Knight came into it.
Yeah. Well, I was actually working on Hollow Knight long before Barbecue, and also for a bit while I was finishing up Expand. So it was a ongoing thing. But definitely did probably the larger part of the music composition and sound design after Barbecue was finished. Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to what you were saying about, whether you have a particular sound or not, or how people would say that you have a very melancholic sound, or you touch on melancholic themes quite often. Hollow Knight is a very melancholic game. Like, it's very somber, has some very cheeky aspects to it. There's some humor in there as well, but it's very dark. It's almost kind of brooding in a way, even just thematically. Like, it's a big underground insect kingdom. As you're exploring, like, you're just finding husks of dead bugs all over the place and stuff. But your music still cuts through, and it really shines here. Walk me through some of the process of how you went about composing for this game.
So one of the early things that Team Cherry told me about writing music for this game is that the music should evoke a sense of dark elegance, and I was trying to maintain that sense.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. They suggested that, and another thing that they mentioned when I first came on, I was trying to maintain that sense.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. They suggested that, and another thing that they mentioned when I first came on was that the music should give us. Well, actually, it's not just the music; it's the art, it's the lore, it's the sense of the place. It should give a sense that there was once a prosperous kingdom that's now fallen to ruin. So the music and also the atmos, to some extent, had to echo. It's actually quite hard to describe. Sort of had to give a sense of loss, I guess, of a place that's no longer there, or people that are no longer there. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you use certain instrumentation throughout the entire score. Like it's very orchestral, even just like sort of chamber orchestral. It's very kind of small group, but pretty much the instruments that you use in that are all really important. They all really stand out and they have their moments. So just walk me through what kind of instruments you were using, and also why you chose them.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, I guess this is especially initially, the piano is used a lot to, I guess, give a sense of that cold, melancholic sound, and really close mic, soft, but very close piano sound with strings very softly played behind it. And then there's some other instruments that feature, I guess. So when we go to Green Path, which is an area underground to the left of Hallownest, or it's still in Hallownest, but it's an area that's got a lot more greenery. It's a bit livelier with the all the different enemies and inhabitants moving around. And because of that greenery and the earthiness of it, I decided to go with the harp, which I use predominantly in areas that are a bit like that are a bit more green. I'm not a synesthesiac, but I always associate the harp with the color green.
Okay.
So whenever I build a scoring template with all my sampled instruments on my computer, the harp is always green.
Okay.
And percussion is always like red or orange, and brass is definitely yellow and orange. It's weird.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to pay attention to that in any future games you work on, I reckon.
So if there's ever going to be like a fire area, there might be some brass playing. But I was like, I don't know, maybe it's a common thing, or maybe it's a culturally conditioned thing that, for me, if I see lava, I want to hear trombones. We did that in barbecue. There was a close up of the flames, and we used some trombones. That was good fun. Anyway, yeah. So various instruments are featured for different reasons, and the other featured instrument in two other featured instruments actually in Hollow Knight. One is the viola, which has a beautiful tone, and it's performed mostly by a musician named Tim Shiel in Adelaide. He came over to my studio, and it was great to work with him on the score. He did a fantastic job. And another instrument, I guess you could say the vocal cords, Amelia Jones, who sang on the City of Tears track. She did a fantastic job on that. Yeah. And then there's a few other instruments here and there, but those ones I think are the main ones. So, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I really enjoyed about Hollow Knight is your use of leitmotif. Like different areas have just different character about them, and even characters themselves have a certain sound to them, which is really interesting. Like, I think of like Dung Defender and some of the other characters, like they have their own sort of thematic music. So how do you go about sort of or creating some of those themes and potentially weaving them in to other tracks?
Well, creating the themes is often the hardest part. Sometimes they just come about easily. Other times I really have to work on it, because I want something that's simple enough that it can be recognizable and people can sing it and understand it. But I don't want it to be... I want it to have a complex enough that it has character, if that makes sense. There are certain characters and some bosses in Hollow Knight that have a kind of a connected theme, and I think for reasons of spoilers and stuff, I can't say what all that is, but there's a connection there, and there's also the Hollow Knight theme, which is heard throughout the game in different ways. And I think Team Cherry and I value the idea and concept of theme and variation, and I think part of that comes from our influence from playing games like Zelda, where theme is very much attached place. So if you go to the Hyrule field, you know you're in the Hyrule field because you hear the Hyrule theme, and Kakariko Village, you hear that theme. And yeah, it's sort of like following this non-exclusive rule that we have to. No, it's not really a have to, but there's a thing where players can associate where they are based on the melody.
Yeah, for sure.
Or the instrument,
Okay.
or the instrument that's playing.
Yeah. So then after Hollow Knight, what was there? What did you start working on at that point?
I kept working on Hollow Knight because we made all this DLC and the fun didn't stop, which is good. It was good.
There's also the ABC Kids TV show, isn't there?
That was a few years before Hollow Knight. That's okay.
I'm all over the place.
All good. Figaro Pho. Adventures of Figaro Pho, and then the new Adventures of Figaro Pho. I was brought on to compose with Luke Juravicius and Mike Darren. It's this kids show about a character who has all the different phobias, and every episode is about a different phobia, like fear of spiders, fear of sleep, fear of clowns, fear of heights, I think. And he has this pet robot dog, and the episodes focus primarily on Figaro Pho and his dog as they go throughout their various adventures, and the ideas get crazier and crazier the further into the series you get. And there were a lot of really fun musical moments because the characters don't speak a language, so it's focused on a multinational audience, but also it focuses on body language and telling a story without having to use words. So the music actually ends up playing a big role in that as well. So yeah, it was great fun to work from that, and I learned a lot from it. And I ended up, I think maybe I mentioned earlier, this is why you mentioned this before, but I did some more work with Luke Juravicius after Hollow Knight was finished on a preschool education series.
So how does working on a kids show then completely change everything else that you worked on, or contrast against everything else that you worked on?
I think with the music we did for those projects, firstly, it's for film, so the music changes based on whatever frame you're on because of the different events that happen on the film. But another thing is that it's really lively, so we're not really doing sad, melancholic music unless it's a very humorous kind of sad moment. Although I think there were probably, on a rare occasion, a couple moments where it's actually a bit of a tearjerker moment, but otherwise it's very humor-focused stuff, or energy-focused, so high energy stuff. Yeah.
So then what was after Hollow Knight?
One of the biggest projects I worked on after Hollow Knight would have involved a horror film, which is not yet released, but we finished the score late last year. It's called Awoken, and it's about a bunch of students at a medical college, which is attached to a hospital, and the lead character's brother has a terminal sleep disorder, and she's basically told that he's going to die within weeks. So she still wants to find a way to fix the problem, but the doctors are saying that it's not possible, except for one doctor who's also a lecturer there who says he did these drug trials that showed some progress with some other patients. So they end up trying that, and then I don't want to give off too much of the storyline, but bad things happen. And it's a horror.
As you'd expect in a horror film.
Horror set in a hospital. Gets a bit crazy. So yeah, I got to make some music for that and learned a lot about jump scares, building tension, and trying to find tonalities that induce anxiety and uncertainty and tension and stuff. So and it can get really interesting because while you're making these things, you're obviously not scared anymore because you're the one making them. You sort of have to continuously ask yourself the question: is this actually scary? And I ended up doing a lot of sound design, I guess, techniques in the music to make things sound really clashy. And we also recorded with the Budapest Scoring Orchestra again, which we did with Barbecue as well, but for this film. And myself and Nathan Cummins and Stephen Tonotto, we all worked on putting together the sheet music for that recording. And one of the things I did with the scoring was I figured out a way to make clusters. So clusters are really big, clashy chords that are out of tune. And when you're using digital technology to play something out of tune, sometimes that can be very hard. And we had a lot of fun and stress trying to figure out how to transcribe quarter tone and it's getting a bit technical. Weird clashy stuff. Sorry?
I said you can get technical if you want.
We had a lot of fun and a lot of stress trying to figure out how to put on paper how the musicians should play certain things out of tune. And that was a big challenge in the project, but we got there in the end.
Okay. So you brought up an interesting point there when you were talking about jump scares and things. Where do you sit on creating audible cues for jump scares, or how do you feel about jump scares in horror in general? Because me personally, being someone who studied film, I also don't really like horror all that much. I just don't enjoy sitting in a very stressful situation and being stressed out for 2 hours. But jump scares, I find, are a very easy and, dare I say, cheap way of getting an immediate response to something that you're just not expecting. So how do you feel about using that as a musician and a composer in an audible setting?
I think if it's done well, it should be a part of the film and a part of the experience. Sometimes when jump scares don't work, it can largely be the result of it feeling like it's sort of been slapped on as an afterthought to try and induce a jump. But I think jump scares are still very useful and an important part of a film, provided that it sort of sits in a structure, and that structure is so sound that it makes so much sense for that to be there, if that makes sense. How do I feel about the sound or the audible aspect of it? I think the same. I think you can stuff it up by sort of just making something really loud and unexpected. But if the sound is considered to be a part of the world that you're creating, like if it maybe you're in a gothic setting and you sort of try to think how would this jump scare sound if it's sort of in a gothic world, like this maybe as an example, like you'd take that sort of stuff into consideration. And not all jump scares are sort of a sudden hit. Like, we also experimented with, there might be a bit of a gesture in the character's jump, so they might actually not suddenly jump up, but there's sort of a woof as they move upwards. So in one jump, I had this recording that we did with some brass earlier on in the project, and we had, it's almost like a bit of a ramp up cluster, a slide up. And that it's a very fast slide, but it seemed to match really well, and it still worked as a jump. So yeah, there's stuff like that. So I think if it can work in the structure of the context and the narrative context of the film, I think it's good. But I do agree that not all jump scares are good, and what you said is totally valid and applicable to a lot of wannabe horrors out there. So.
Well, thank you for justifying my opinion there.
That's right.
Well, just because I'm intrigued with horror, because again, I've never really worked in horror or anything like that because I don't really expose myself to it. But are there certain sounds that you find yourself referring back to with horror? Are there sounds to you that work best with horror and even in something like jump scares? Or do you, again, try to mix things up just to see what you can do?
I think there are some really good go-to instruments and sounds and techniques that I certainly used a lot. One of them is the piano. So not necessarily playing the piano traditionally, but doing something like holding down the sustain pedal, opening up the lid, and maybe hammering the strings hard with a drumstick or something, or like playing a bunch of strings in a big glissando, or doing something like using a recording of strings playing Bartok pizzicato, which is the sound of string or violin, cello, viola, double bass players pulling the string so hard and letting it go such that the string slaps against the fretboard, which is often used in jump scares. I seem to hear it a lot in TV shows and movies. And it might be layered against maybe the brass doing a bit of a cluster or something. And clusters are generally the other go-to, so having orchestral instruments playing a lot of notes at once, out of tune. And then there's synthesizers. So I used a modular synthesizer a lot for this horror film, and I've got a bunch of tube distortion amplifiers and envelope shapers and a couple spring... Oh yeah, spring reverb is also a really handy thing. So slapping the spring with your hand while it's picking up the sound makes a really fantastic scary jump scare. So things like that, can have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, it just sounds like you're just having fun the whole time, just trying to get new sounds and seeing if anything sounds scary.
Yeah, it can be fun. Yeah, it's also like sometimes a bit stressful because you're working on something that's quite like you mentioned before, how you don't like sitting through horror. Sometimes if I'm working on something all day that's very stress inducing, I'll have to work on a more relaxing cue to balance it out. Sometimes, but otherwise it's really fun.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So is there anything else then? Are there any current projects that are still in the works?
That
you can talk about?
There's a couple projects I'm working on now, but I don't know what I can say. One of them I definitely signed an NDA for, but I am working definitely more with Team Cherry on the moment on some more content, which I'm really excited about and look forward to telling the world about. So everyone keep their eyes on Twitter, and I'll be hopefully posting some stuff up on YouTube real soon as well. So
excellent. Well, all right. So looking back over everything that you've done so far, in that case, is there a particular project that you've really enjoyed working on, and was there like a turning point for you that you realized, yes, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to keep working on?
That's a hard one.
Or is there a project that you feel has influenced you the most, or you felt that you've influenced the most?
Okay, maybe the start off, for starters, the project that probably influenced me the most in me feeling like I'm in the right place was probably the Figaro Pho series. The two seasons that I worked on, and I think that's partly because the material, as in the animation, was just, and the storytelling was just so fantastic, and the voice acting as well. They're all geniuses, and the other aspect of that was that there was just so much of it. I was just doing it every day. And getting better and better at it. So I sort of found a bit of a calling through that, I think. And then the one that I suppose has probably influenced the most is probably Hollow Knight.
Okay.
I think it's reached a lot of people out there, and a lot of people find it really good project. So
yeah. Well then, so in that case, looking forward, or even would you say that getting into working with games and film was something that you felt was quite an easy thing to do, or did you feel like that it's something that a lot of people probably won't consider doing or won't be able to do? And did you find that getting into composing for film and games is is something that you would recommend that people try to do?
Let me think. I highly
Because I know, for example,
how about this? Sorry. Go on.
I was going to say, I know that trying to be a filmmaker, for example, is a really difficult thing to do. There's a lot of sort of building trust and building networks and, really proving yourself just to get to sort of the bottom of the ladder and then work your way up, like in a grueling way up towards the top of the ladder. So do you feel like, working with games and film in music is sort of a similar experience?
I think that everyone takes their own path into film and game music, and I'm not going to say you should do it the way I did and that it's worthwhile and that people should do it, because I've just been like reading up on what other composers do a lot, and there's some out there that say you really have to start by getting work with another composer, so actually being an assistant to someone else and learning that way. I've never really had that luxury. I guess I've been able to, when I was brought on for Figaro Pho, I learnt a bit from Mike and Luke, who were also writing on it, and they were the guys who were talking to the producers a lot of the time, so they wore the responsibility of that, and I just got to write. So I think it would have been, actually, maybe I'll just phrase it this way: if anyone does want to get into it, try to put yourself into a situation where you can learn from others or from yourself, but do it in a way that's you're not taking on the most pressure-inducing or responsible project to start with, and you probably won't be able to do that anyway, but put yourself into a position where you can make lots of mistakes. For me, it was writing music for the film school students, so it was all done for free, and we were all kind of learning. They hadn't worked with a composer before, and I hadn't worked with filmmakers before, so we could just kind of throw stuff at the wall, and if it all went to crap, we'd start again. And I wouldn't lose money, and they wouldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, it was a lot easier that way. So so I'd say if you want to give it a shot, be prepared to make a lot of mistakes, but find people who are also learning as well.
Okay. All right. Well, so to finish up then, what's a dream project of yours? What's something that you would love to work on that's like sort of like the top of your bucket list right now? Whether it's a game or a movie or both.
At the moment, I don't have a lot of time because of my duties with Team Cherry and all that, but if I ever do, and if the opportunity opens up, I would love to work on a big open world adventure, something like Skyrim or Witcher, and not necessarily solo, like being able to collaborate with another composer or two on something like that would be fantastic. Because one thing I don't get a lot of is the sort of sense of a team on the music side of things, and I'd like to sort of dive into that again, because I kind of missed out on having a band and doing all that sort of stuff. So
yeah, sure.
So
do you find that that's probably because of where we are, like, both of us being in Adelaide and things, or do you find that if you were, say, in LA or in Europe somewhere, that you might be able to collaborate a lot more? Is it a matter of location for you?
I think that's a factor, definitely. I don't know many others who are doing what I'm doing here in Adelaide, especially for video games. So, but there are benefits to that as well. Say, there's a lot more competition. There's a lot more external pressure, and a larger part of your mind is thinking about what the other person is trying to get from you and all that sort of stuff. And I sort of, I'm glad that I don't have to deal with that a lot. There is obviously competition still, but we also can in a city like Adelaide, and there's probably many other cities that allow this as well. We can really sort of put the time aside to just focus on the content creation and the composition and game development. Yeah,
for sure. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me, Chris. Really appreciate you taking the time out to speak with me and delve into sort of your history and your thoughts and all those kinds of things.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. I hope everything goes well. I'm looking forward to seeing what your collaboration with Team Cherry and all those guys over there is going to be next. And even then, just seeing where you go from here on out. So yeah, congratulations on all your success.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
No worries. All right, I'll catch you later.
Okay, see ya.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Game Composure. To keep up to date with Christopher Larkin's work, including updates to Hollow Knight Silksong, which was recently announced by Team Cherry, follow him on Twitter @ComposerLarkin. Check out his website www.composerlarkin.com or like him on Facebook. This interview was recorded on January 14, 2019. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating it on your preferred listening platform and share with others. Also, feel free to follow the podcast on Twitter @GameComposure, and hey, even follow me @Mangello. That's MANJELL0. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing the next episode, 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 to sharing the next